Hello, Ruby here. Welcome back to my channel. If you are new here, I am a professional psychic medium, channeler, tarot reader, astrologer, and priestess. And today we are going to be talking about the goddess Isis. This is actually a video I'm filming for my Patreon community. Each month we work with a different face of the divine feminine. But similarly to what I did last month with our first video on Mary Magdalene, I'm opening up this video to the larger YouTube community. That way, if you are feeling called to join the Patreon, this will give you a little bit of a taste of what we'll be talking about for the month of April. All right, so the goddess Isis. Isis is a goddess that I have worked with very intimately, and I was so moved when she came forward as the goddess that wanted to be called in and worked with within the Patreon community for the month of April. I had initially thought that we would be working with a different goddess. I thought we would save Isis for August for the Lionsgate portal. But just so strongly, Isis came in to be worked with, and I posted yesterday on the Patreon that Isis was going to be the goddess for April, and we did our initial channel message from her. And so many of my Patreon subscribers in the comments said that they had encounters or these intuitive inklings that Isis was going to be the goddess for April. And that was such beautiful confirmation for me that there was, multiple members of the Patreon community that had these moments of connection with Isis before I'd officially announced that Isis was going to be the goddess that we are going to be calling in and letting guide us for April. And this month is such a pivotal month in the collective energy. If you're watching this video at the time I'm filming it, we have this big eclipse portal we're moving through. While Mercury is in retrograde, there's all of this intensity in the collective energy, specifically around shedding and releasing old karmic structures and patterns that no longer serve us, and going through a period of initiation and death and rebirth. And these are all themes of life and soul evolution that Isis is so connected to. So who is Isis? Isis is an ancient Egyptian mother goddess. She is so ancient. She has been, revered and worshipped throughout cultures. Not only was she an ancient Egyptian goddess, but her cult spread through the Greek and Roman period as well. Isis means throne. One of the themes of Isis, or one of the offices that she holds, is guiding us into our own spiritual authority and sovereignty. Isis' Egyptian name was Aset. Isis is called She of 1,000 Names because she is a multi-layered, multi-dimensional goddess, really similarly to what I was sharing about Mary Magdalene in the month of March on the Patreon. How Mary Magdalene is so complex. It's like the more that we work with Mary Magdalene, the more we study her wisdom teachings, the more we realize there's so much there. It's very similar with Isis. She isn't a goddess of one thing. She is a goddess of many, many, many different streams of wisdom. So she of 1,000 names, but we associate Isis as being the goddess of magic. She's called the goddess of magic. She is the goddess of motherhood. She is the goddess of grains and harvest. She was closely associated with Demeter. We also see the worship of Isis and the reverence of Isis evolving into worship of the Virgin Mary as Christianity took over. So statues of Isis or cults of Isis became, statues of Mary, or became adoration of Mary. And we see Isis and Horus really paralleled in the iconography of Mary and Christ. And so I think it's really fitting that we are working with Isis after our work with Mary Magdalene, because not only is Mary Magdalene so connected to Isis and a priestess of Isis, but there's really similar themes of, death and resurrection. and reconnecting in with the soul light and coming back into wholeness after cycles of trauma that are really present both in the work of Mary Magdalene and the work of Isis, right? A lot of the Christian iconography is directly related to the Isis myth, all right? So Isis is also called the Queen of Heaven, similarly to Mary. You know, we also see the Virgin Mary, the Virgin Mother, called the Queen of Heaven. And some would say that, you know, Mary and Isis are the same being even. But they hold very similar energy as being these beautiful sources of divine motherly comfort and grace that we can turn to in our own times of needing clarity or needing guidance, or you know, just needing some divine support. You know, I find Isis to be such a loving, universal, motherly energy. And I'm just going to look at my notes. Okay, so Isis is also the goddess of magic. So we can call on her for assistance in our own magical workings. You know, Heka being the ancient Egyptian name for magic, and really Heka being like this universal life force that we work with and that we can start to channel to create change in our life. Isis is also really associated with me to the archetype of Virgo and the planet Mercury. And Virgo also being this archetype of the Virgin Mother. So we really see a lot of parallels between Mary and Isis. They hold very similar roles in, you know, the divine cosmology. And as I shared yesterday on my Patreon page, I did a 40-day practice to Isis years ago, during the month of April, funnily enough. And in that time, Isis gave me the gift of astrology, of reading natal charts. It was something that was really downloaded into my system. I had been a fan of astrology. I'd had my chart read, but I had no intention of becoming a professional astrologer. And not only did she give me the ability to read natal charts, but the ability to see past lives very clearly in the natal chart. And Isis is definitely connected to our past lives and our ability to pull in gifts and talents from past lives and our ability to clear karma from our past lives. And, you know, I, of course, went on to get, you know, official certification to take training in astrology. Like, I wasn't going to just say, oh, I got this download and now I'm an astrologer. And, you know, I think Isis really wants us as her children to always continue our search for wisdom. The search for wisdom seems to me like a way that we honor Isis, and we it's almost like an offering that we can give her, is our pursuit and our study of wisdom. But that experience with Isis, where she really she downloaded this tool for me that I could use, felt very mercurial. And, you know, we see throughout some of the myths of Isis that she is a little bit of a trickster. There's a particular myth where she tricks Ra into him telling her his name, because the name of Ra, the true name of Ra, when one has it, one can wield the powers of the universe, which really ties into her being a goddess of magic and a goddess of learning. But throughout the myths and stories of Isis, we see her using her cunning, her trickster-like ability to really take care of herself and to get things done. And so even though Isis is a mother goddess, and maybe we would typically associate her with like a planet of like Venus or the moon, she definitely is a goddess of love. You know, we see her in her relationship with Osiris, and she's definitely a lunar goddess. She's both a solar goddess and a lunar goddess. Similarly to Mary Magdalene, we talked a lot in the Patreon community last month about how Mary Magdalene is the unification of Eve and Lilith, and she brings together the light and the dark. We see something really similar with Isis. But Isis is really connected to communication, to the throat chakra. I also call in Isis a lot when I do my sound healing work. I'm a sound healer. And even I have this rattle here because as I work with Isis, a rattle, using a rattle for clearing is something I do in my office as a priestess of Isis. Using sound, using word, using the holy word, using holy utterance and sound to clear and to shift and to transmute energy, to me is within the wisdom stream of Isis. And I have full body chills right now as I speak. And that only happens when I'm really connected and channeling the goddess. Okay. Let me look at my notes here. All right. Isis is also a goddess of sacred grief and of funeral rites. And the priestesses of Isis, and I've shared this before on my channel, one of their duties was when there was a burial, when there was a funeral, they would literally channel the grief of Isis, the grief that Isis felt for Osiris after he was murdered by his brother Set. And they would openly like cry and sob and mourn and grieve. And in our modern Western society, we have a very strange association with sadness and grief. And we view it as something you are not supposed to really, do in public, not for public consumption. There's some shame around maybe being too emotional or too dramatic. But the priestesses of Isis would publicly mourn and cry, and that was the way that they really channeled the divine feminine energy. And as somebody who, was born to be a priestess and has been doing this for several lifetimes, those who know me know that I am a crier. And if we have something in our system where emotion clearing, because tears are so holy, crying is a way that we can really clear emotion from our body, from our cellular memory. It's a really holy and sacred act, and it's one of the most beautiful things we do as humans. Our laughter and our tears are so just like sacred and beautiful and poignant. But if we have contraction around feeling grief or feeling our difficult feelings, Isis is a beautiful goddess that we can work with in evolving and healing through that. And some of my most powerful moments with Isis are times when I've called on her when I have been in a place of grief and suffering. Because something that I talk about a lot, in my work as a spiritual teacher, is that our work in our own spiritual practice should never be about bypassing suffering or the absence of suffering. In every story of the divine that we see, including the story of Isis, even the gods and goddesses face moments of suffering and of pain and of walking the underworld. Because one of the ways in which we receive wisdom and we go through an initiatory process is through the experience of suffering and of setbacks. And so Isis is definitely not a goddess to work with if you don't want any type of adversity in your life. Because in the stories of mythology of Isis, again and again and again, she is faced with experiences of adversity and of suffering. And then she calls on her divine power, including her ability to be a trickster, to be cunning, to use her mind, to move through those experiences. And so she is a goddess of transformation, for sure. And the process of transformation is one that cannot be fully experienced or moved through without any adversity. And so really Isis is this beautiful divine feminine example of how we can use all of the material in our life, including our experiences that are more painful, for our own soul evolution and transformation, that we can become these shapeshifters, that each time we encounter an experience of suffering, instead of getting stuck in it or becoming a victim of it, we can use our spiritual practice and we can use our connection to our source consciousness and our divinity to our power ourself, and to really up level ourself, and to gain wisdom and understanding and new gifts and a new and deeper connection to ourself and to our source. The story of Isis and Osiris came to be used in the mystery cults and in the mystery schools. And the purpose of the mystery cults was to give initiates a deep embodied experience that it would in turn give them an understanding of the true nature of the soul. So the mystery cults and the mystery rites were shamanic. They weren't a classroom experience where you would just sit and have knowledge spoken at you like I'm doing right now to you. Within the mystery cults and the mystery rites, initiates would, a lot of times there would be fasting, there'd be certain food that you couldn't eat, certain activities that you couldn't engage in, and you would enter into these mystery initiations, and these experiences would be hard on you, on your body. They would be difficult psychologically. They were intended to really break you down to your essence, to your core, so you could experience the truth that was being shared to you in a psycho-spiritual way at your deepest possible level, that would result in really an alchemical transformational occurrence. And the truth that was being expressed through the mystery cults of Isis was that the soul is eternal. The soul does not die. The soul is our true nature, and it is not expunged. It does not die at the time our physical bodies die. And by the end of the mystery initiations, the initiate would know that truth deep in their core. It become a core truth, not something that they just intellectually, gave credence to. Because there's lots of things that we can say, oh yeah, I know that's truth. But does that truth really live in our body? Does that truth really resonate in our field? And the purpose of a shamanic rite, like a vision quest, in which you're, denying your body certain things, and maybe you're denying your body sleep, is so that truth gets in. And so Isis really teaches us to work with the soul, to work with the soul light, to work with the soul self. She is very connected to this truth that the soul is eternal. And one of the things that we can call on Isis for, and that Isis has walked me through and will still walk me through, is not only experiences of trauma in this lifetime, and I'll talk about that in a moment, not only in the retrieval of our past life gifts, like what happened to me when she dropped in my ability to see past lives in the natal chart and to read the natal chart. That was Isis dropping in a past life gift. And I'll say that happened at the end of a 40-day period where I was connecting in with her energy every day. So I definitely think, with Isis, we are rewarded for the efforts that were put in, which is her role as really a magician and the highest vibration of Virgo and mercurial energy, right? With Virgo, there is this feeling of, all right, show up to the temple every day and you'll be, granted a gift or a boon. Not like it always happens that way. And I'm not saying burn yourself out doing spiritual work. I'm very much an advocate for let these practices be something that fill you, not be something that stress you out. But I've noticed with Isis that when we do stretch ourselves and we are doing our growth work and we are showing up every day, that's when she tends to reward us. As like a mother goddess, that's to be expected, right? So, Isis and healing trauma. Last week, when Isis came in and told me that she was the goddess that was coming through for the month of April, which was such a beautiful experience, she showed me the myth of Osiris and Set and Horus in a new way. So in this myth, Isis and Osiris, they're lovers. And Set, their brother, who is really the personification of chaos and trauma and suffering, right? Set kills Osiris to take the throne. And Set sprinkles Osiris's body parts all over so that Isis won't be able to retrieve them and bring Osiris back to life. And Isis goes through this process of finding all of Osiris's dismembered parts, and she puts them back together. And when she puts them back together, she has sex with Osiris. They come into union, and she becomes pregnant with the solar child, Horus. And Isis was showing me that this myth is a myth of healing from trauma. That in the myth, we become every character in the myth, all right? So in mythology, myth is a way that we can receive truths about our eternal nature and the nature of the universe and the nature of God in a way that our system can process. It's an indirect form of revelation, of gnosis, of knowledge. So in this myth, we are every character in the myth, okay? So our trauma, Set is our trauma. Set is the chaos of life. We go through an experience where we are traumatized. Let's say we have a difficult childhood and our soul fractures, our soul splits. And those who are familiar with soul retrieval from a shamanic perspective know that when the soul has fractured, one must journey back to each piece of soul fracture and to find the part and to bring it back into the soul. And this is work that we can do with the goddess Isis on our own. And so, in our, journey of healing from trauma, we retrieve all of our fractured parts and we put them back together. But once we do that, we do not stay Osiris. We do not simply become the person that we were before the trauma happened to us. Instead, we become something new. This is the experience of being born again that has been very distorted in the Christian teachings. Mystical Christianity is saying the exact same thing that the story, the myth of Osiris and Isis is telling us. Osiris is Christ. Okay? When we heal our fractured self from trauma and we come back into unity with the soul and unity with our Christ consciousness, we fundamentally transform into a new being. We aren't just what we were before it all happened to us. And so Isis was showing me that she is a guide in this process. And the experience of having trauma and then healing from trauma is an ascension template. And what I mean by that, I mean it is a way that we come into contact with our source and with our divinity. Some of us signed up to have experiences of adversity and oppression as an ascension template, because that is the experience that will usually wake us up into our God consciousness. Okay. Let's see what else I want to say here. All right, so one of my Patreon members asked me if I would explain what I meant when I said that Isis was a tantric goddess, because I mentioned that Isis was a tantric goddess yesterday on the Patreon page. Tantra is a non-dual cosmology. So within tantric thought, the whole world is comprised of Shiva and Shakti, consciousness and the divine energy. And the ancient Egyptian cosmology is one of balance. And so Isis, any goddess that is a goddess that balances the duality of the light and dark feminine is a tantric goddess, in my view. That's just my opinion. So last month we talked about how Mary Magdalene was a tantric goddess. She is very similar. So whenever we're working with a tantric goddess, we are working at balancing the energies inside of us. So much of, Egyptian cosmology is one of balance, of the universe being in balance. And so we can work with Isis to not only balance our inner divine masculine, divine feminine energies, our Shiva and our Shakti, but coming into balance with other aspects of our light and our dark. So for example, Isis rules the process of grieving and mourning and suffering. If we are finding ourselves really pulled into grieving and suffering in a way that is unbalanced, or we really want to bypass that experience, we can work with Isis for assistance in finding balance through the process of our grief. How can we grieve and not be so not come from a place of being so ungrounded in that grief that we lose control of ourselves, right? That is, I think, all I will say on that, just for the sake of time, because we're already 30 minutes in, but perhaps on the Patreon page, I will make a whole video about Isis as a tantric goddess. Isis is also connected to sacred sexuality. Not just because of her myth, she comes into union with Osiris and something new is born from that, but because she is connected to life. Isis is a life giver. Isis resurrects Osiris. When we're talking about the force of life, we're talking about Shakti. And the purpose of sacred sexuality is to learn how to move the Kundalini energy, the universal life force energy, through our body for the purpose of regeneration and magic. Isis is a goddess of magic. Okay? Isis is also very associated with the Sirius star. Now, the Sirius star has some overlap with Mercury in terms of its attributes, communication, learning, wisdom. I also feel that Isis is really connected to the celestial realms and the work that we can do with light beings and interdimensional beings. So if we have a connection to a concept such as star seeds, which my view on star seeds is very different than a lot of other spiritual teachers, but I do, how do I say this? I think all of us, or most of us, have some side of star origin that we can connect to. I don't think it's a thing that only a few people have. But if we're looking to deepen our connection with that part of our soul, Isis is the goddess that we can call on. Okay, and if we feel a connection to the Sirius star, Isis is a beautiful goddess that we can call on for support in that connection. Okay? Let me just see if there's anything else that I want to say, because I don't want this to be too long. Like I mentioned before, I do think that Isis is really connected to light and sound healing. And using the modalities and the technology of light and sound to heal is something that feels very connected to the celestial realms and to the galactic realms. So, like I said, star beings. Isis definitely has a connection to that realm. Another way that Isis is a tantric goddess is she has her divine counterpart Osiris. So she's in a pair. Isis and Osiris, Mary Magdalene and Yeshua, Krishna and Radha. Most of the Hindu pantheon, there is in pairs. So we have Radha and Krishna, right? We have Rama and Sita. We have these pairs. Shiva and Parvati. And that is tantric. That is honoring both of the polarity and both of the energies. So Isis being a part of a divine pair is another reason why we might call her a tantric goddess. Okay? But she's also a goddess of becoming strong and finding your authority and finding your sovereignty after a time of grief. Right? Like Osiris stays in the underworld after she resurrects him. Similarly to, Christ being crucified and then Mary Magdalene continuing his journey. There's a reason why Mary Magdalene is a priestess of Isis. It's a continuation of the same wisdom, the same divine stream, the same red thread. And so, I could continue to go on and on and on because, like I said, Isis is so multidimensional. She's so multifaceted. But if you feel called to work with her, she will let you know where to start. And if you are looking for a resource to connect in with Isis, my favorite resource, and I have owned this deck for years, is the Isis Oracle by Alana Fairchild. If you actually do the healing exercises in this deck, you will have transformation in your life. I have been working with this deck for years. I have been very connected to the goddess Isis for years. I've been working with her energy. Like I said, Mary Magdalene is my patron deity, which means that Isis is kind of my patron deity. And I'm really, really excited to be consecrating my devotional practice to Isis this month, because every time I consecrate my devotional practice to Isis and I do like an intense devotional period to her, there are always really positive changes in my life. Like, I don't know why I don't do it more. I do it when I feel called, but I should do it more. And I'm going to be doing a little more with Isis than I have in the previous months with Sekhmet and Mary Magdalene, just because I find with Isis, the more effort and the more sacrifice I put in, the more benefits I receive. And I receive a lot of benefits from the work that I do with Isis. And so I will definitely be working with the Isis Oracle this month. I work with it all the time. I also have the Isis Pocket Oracle, which I really enjoy. And then another practice that I do with Isis, I actually bought the Alana Fairchild Isis journal. I just ordered it on Amazon. I've gone through like 2 or 3 of those journals in, the past 5 or 6 years. I think I've had the Isis Oracle for like 6 years now. It's been a minute. Just because one of my Patreon subscribers told me they had just ordered it, I think right before I announced it was Isis. And I was like, I would love to fill up a journal this month. So I'll do journaling work with Isis where I'll just talk to her through, you know, the journal. And then something else that I do with Isis is I do leave a lot of offerings. Leaving offerings is something that is definitely in the Egyptian tradition. I sometimes leave traditional offerings, so I'll leave her like bread and water, or like bread and wine. And then sometimes I'll leave her more intuitive offerings. Like I leave a lot of herbs, dried herbs for the deities that I work with, and chocolate and things like that. So I'll be doing that this month. And then I also do a lot of work with the rattle and with sound healing and clearing with Isis. So if you are not a member of the Patreon community and you are curious, I think this would be a lovely month to join. Each month we work with a face of the divine feminine. And then I think I already like went into my spiel that we do energy updates and astrology updates and journaling questions and tarot questions and all that good stuff. So I love you. I am wishing you well, and I am very much looking forward to being on this journey with you this month with the goddess Isis.